When I think back to that day, the day everything inside me cracked and rebuilt itself at the same time, it almost feels like watching someone else's life play out in slow motion, as if I'm standing outside my own memory, looking through a fogged-up window where every detail is blurry but every emotion is sharp enough to still hurt. I remember stepping backstage at the school talent show with my hands trembling so violently that I had to press them against my jeans to stop them from shaking. And even though I had practiced for weeks, even though I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, nothing prepared me for the way my breath turned shallow the moment I heard the buzzing chatter of the audience, a mixture of bored conversation, fake enthusiasm, and that restless teenage energy that fills a room like static electricity. I kept telling myself that this was my chance, my moment to finally prove to myself that I could do something bold, something meaningful, something that wasn't invisible. But the truth is, as I walked toward the stage, every step felt heavier, like the floor was pulling me down, reminding me of every moment in my life when I had felt like I wasn't enough. Not talented enough, not confident enough, not brave enough. Yet somehow I still kept moving, driven by this stubborn little spark of hope inside me that refused to die. When my name was called, the spotlight hit me with such intensity that for a second I forgot where I was, forgot how to breathe, forgot the lyrics I had repeated so many times that they should have lived in my bones, and all I could see was a blur of faces staring back at me, waiting, judging, expecting something I suddenly wasn't sure I could deliver. The microphone felt too heavy, my throat too tight, and then, it happened. Someone in the front row snickered, then another laughed, and then the sound spread like wildfire through the hall, a wave of laughter rolling toward me so fast and so loud in the chest, and the humiliation rushed through me like cold water, freezing every muscle in my body, making me wish I could just disappear into the shadows. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, louder than the microphone, louder than the music track waiting to play, louder than my own thoughts, and for a moment, I honestly thought I would walk off the stage, that I would escape before the embarrassment became unbearable, but something inside me, something fragile and stubborn, told me not to run, not this time, not again. So I inhaled, forcing air into lungs that felt too tight, nodded to the music technician, and let the track begin even though my voice wavered on the very first note, trembling, cracking, almost breaking in half under the weight of everyone's expectations and everyone's amusement. I could feel their eyes on me like spotlights, harsh and judgmental, as if every second of my shaky performance was entertaining to them in all the wrong ways. But I kept going, pushing through the fear, through the shame, through the burning in my cheeks that made me feel like I was standing too close to a fire, because I knew that if I gave up now, I would remember this moment for the rest of my life as the moment I proved them right. The moment I confirmed that I was nothing but a joke. So I sang, even when my voice cracked again, even when my hands shook so much the microphone almost slipped, even when the laughter died down and the room fell into an awkward, suffocating silence that made every second feel longer than the last. When the song finally ended, the applause was small and uncomfortable, more out of politeness than admiration. But I still bowed, still forced a smile, still walked off that stage with shoulders as heavy as bricks, and the second I reached backstage, my legs almost gave out from the emotional exhaustion, because I truly believed that I had just lived the most humiliating moment of my entire life. And even the next morning, I avoided looking at anyone, avoided going online, avoided thinking about the show at all because the memory stung too much, like a fresh bruise that hurt with even the smallest touch. But then something I never expected happened. A video of my performance started circulating online, posted by someone in the audience, and instead of mocking comments or cruel jokes, people were writing things like, "This kid is brave. This took courage. They didn't deserve to be laughed at." And slowly, one comment at a time, the story I had created in my own mind, the story where I was a failure, where I was the punchline, began to crumble. The video kept spreading, reaching people I had never met, strangers who somehow saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself, and instead of embarrassment, the responses started filling me with something new, something I hadn't felt in a long time, strength. I began reading comment after comment, watching the view count rise, seeing my name appear in places I never imagined, and each message felt like a tiny piece of my confidence being rebuilt. Not instantly, not magically, but slowly, steadily, like sunlight creeping into a room that's been dark for too long. The more people watched, the more they understood, and the more I realized that maybe my performance wasn't a failure at all. Maybe it was a moment of raw honesty, something real and imperfect and human, something that connected with people in a way perfectly polished performances never could. I started getting messages from kids who said they were afraid to perform but felt encouraged after watching me. From people who said they admired the fact that I didn't run off the stage even when it was hard. From strangers who told me that what happened to me had happened to them too, and that somehow made my pain feel less isolating, less suffocating. Day by day, I found myself standing a little taller, speaking a little more. The same moment that once filled me with shame had somehow become the moment that shaped me into someone braver, someone stronger, someone who understood that courage isn't loud or perfect. It's quiet, shaky, imperfect, and still willing to try. And now, when I look back at that night, I don't see humiliation anymore. I see a turning point, the moment where I learned that sometimes your worst experiences carry the seeds of your greatest transformation. And sometimes the world sees your strength long before you're able to see it yourself. And if that moment taught me anything, it's that one embarrassing night doesn't define you, but how you rise from it absolutely does. And I rose in ways I never imagined I could. And as the days passed and the video kept traveling farther than my own fear ever had, something inside me began to shift so slowly I almost didn't notice it at first. Like a door opening just a tiny bit to let in the faintest bit of light. And with every new message, every share, every unexpected moment of kindness from complete strangers, I could feel my heart learning how to breathe again, learning how to trust again, learning how to take up space in a world where I once felt too small. I found myself replaying the performance not with the same shame that once choked me, but with a growing sense of pride because I realized that every shaky note, every crack in my voice, every tremble in my hands was proof that I had done something people spend their whole lives avoiding. I had shown up, imperfect and afraid, and that was worth more than applause could ever be. Teachers who barely noticed me before suddenly stopped me in the hallway to say they'd seen the video, that they were impressed by my determination, and even though their voices were soft and polite, their words seeped into the cracks of my confidence like glue, holding together the pieces I thought were broken beyond repair. Some classmates who had laughed that night avoided eye contact. Now, not because they felt guilty, but because they didn't know how to react to someone who had turned humiliation into something powerful, something inspiring, something they couldn't laugh at anymore. And the funniest part was I didn't feel angry at them, not anymore, because I had learned something deeper. Sometimes people laugh not because you're weak, but because they're afraid of trying themselves, afraid of standing where you stood, under those lights, vulnerable and exposed. As the video continued to grow online, interview requests popped up, small publications wrote tiny articles about the kid who kept singing. And even though it felt surreal, like watching a version of myself in a movie, I embraced it because it taught me that life doesn't always reward perfection. Sometimes it rewards heart. And slowly I started practicing again, not because I wanted revenge or validation, but because I started loving the sound of my own voice again. Loving the way music made me feel safe and brave at the same time. Loving the way performing wasn't about the audience anymore. It was about me, about the connection between my fears and my courage, about the version of myself who had stood on that stage and refused to run. Eventually, the principal invited me to perform again at the end-of-year ceremony, and the moment he said it, my stomach twisted with a mix of dread and hope, because returning to that same stage felt like returning to the scene of an old wound. But something inside me whispered that maybe this time the wound would heal differently. So I said yes, even though my hands trembled, even though the memory still stung a little, because I needed to face that stage again, not to erase the past, but unknowingly inspired just by not giving up. When I stepped into the spotlight again, the room went quiet, not with judgment but with anticipation, as if everyone was holding their breath for me this time instead of against me. I gripped the microphone, feeling its weight, feeling my own worth in that moment, and when I started singing, my voice didn't crack from fear. It cracked from emotion, from the memory of everything I had survived, from the realization that the same stage that once made me feel like nothing was now giving me the chance to feel like someone who mattered, someone who fought, someone who didn't break. And as I sang, the room didn't laugh. It listened, every face softened, every eye watching me not with mockery but with something closer to admiration. And by the time the final note slipped out of my throat, the applause that erupted wasn't polite or forced or uncomfortable. It was real, loud, warm, a sound that wrapped around me like a long overdue embrace. And in that moment, I knew that this entire journey, the embarrassment, the anxiety, the viral video, the slow rebuilding of my self-worth, had taught me one of the hardest but most beautiful lessons of my life. That sometimes the universe breaks you in front of others so it can rebuild you in front of the world, showing you that even at your lowest, even when people laugh, even when your voice shakes and your hope feels small, you still have the power to rise, to shine, to reclaim. The very moment that tried to destroy you, and when you finally stand tall again, the world sees not your perfection but your resilience, and that is what truly makes you unforgettable. After that night, when the applause still echoed faintly in my ears like a gentle reminder that healing was real and possible, life didn't magically become perfect, but something inside me had undeniably shifted, like a locked door inside my chest had finally opened and let a new version of me step out. A version who wasn't afraid to be seen anymore, who wasn't terrified of failing, who understood that courage isn't a moment. It's a choice you make again and again, especially on the days when fear sits heavy on your shoulders. The morning after my second performance, when I walked through the school hallway, the whispers I heard weren't poisoned with laughter now but softened with respect, curiosity, even admiration, and instead of shrinking into myself like I always used to, I walked with my head just a little higher, not out of pride but out of gratitude for everything I had overcome. Teachers I barely spoke to started telling me they believed in my potential. Classmates who once laughed now greeted me with hesitant smiles, and even though part of me remembered the pain they caused, another part of me realized I wasn't the same fragile person I was back then. I was stronger, and forgiveness wasn't a weakness, it was freedom. Slowly, music became more than just a hobby I hid away in my room. It became a lifeline, a way to express the words I never knew how to say, and so I spent late nights writing. Lyrics on scraps of paper, recording small clips on my phone, and letting my voice carry all the emotions that were too heavy to swallow alone. Sometimes I would read the comments under the viral video, new ones still appearing even months later, people saying things like, "I watched this because I heard it was emotional, but I stayed because it reminded me of myself," and each comment felt like a tiny thread connecting me to strangers who had felt the same fear, the same humiliation, the same ache I once thought belonged only to me. The more I connected with those people, people from other countries, other cultures, other lives, the more I realized that embarrassment is universal, that everyone has a moment they wish they could erase, but not everyone finds the courage to turn that moment into a foundation for something greater. And so, I made a quiet promise to myself that I would never let fear silence me again, not on stage, not in life, not anywhere, because now I knew what stood on the other side of fear wasn't darkness, but the possibility of transformation. Months passed, and the school invited me to mentor new students preparing for their own performances, and at first I didn't understand why they chose me, but then I saw the nervousness in their eyes, the same trembling doubt I once carried like a weight, and I realized that maybe my story wasn't just meant for me. Maybe it was meant to guide others, to remind them that even if people laugh, even if their voice cracks, even if they stumble or fall, they are still worthy of standing on that stage. During rehearsals, I would see them tense up, afraid of making mistakes, and I would tell them what I had learned the hardest way possible. That perfection doesn't move people, honesty does, vulnerability does, the courage to keep going does, and slowly, I watched their confidence bloom like tiny flames in the dark. Sometimes on quiet nights, when everyone else was asleep, I would sit by my window, listening to the distant hum of the city and thinking about how strange life is, how a moment that once felt like the end of everything became the beginning of something I never expected. A version of myself that was braver, softer, stronger, and more open to the world. And I would think about the laughter that once haunted me and realize that it no longer had power over me, because I had taken back the moment, rewritten its meaning, transformed its weight into something I could carry without fear. And maybe that's the real miracle. Not that a video went viral, not that people praised me, but that I learned to look at my own reflection without flinching, learned to see not a failure but a survivor, someone who stood in front of a crowd and kept going even when his voice was breaking, someone who found courage in the middle of humiliation and turned it into a story that reached hearts far beyond the walls of that school auditorium. And as I continue moving forward in life with new dreams forming, new stages waiting, new challenges rising like mountains in the distance, I remind myself again and again that bravery isn't a one-time moment. It's a slow and steady becoming, a journey of learning how to step into the light even when your knees are shaking, and if I could survive the night the world laughed at me, then I can survive anything, and maybe even shine brighter than I ever thought possible. And as time continued to pass, carrying me steadily forward like a slow river that never stops moving no matter how many memories cling to its banks, I started to realize that the moment which once shattered me had quietly planted seeds in every corner of my life. Seeds I didn't even know were growing until one day I looked back and noticed how different everything felt. How I spoke with more certainty, how I walked with more purpose, how I no longer hid my voice behind closed doors or whispered my dreams as if they were too fragile. I found myself singing freely now, humming in hallways, practicing in empty classrooms, recording little clips late at night, no longer worried about being mocked, because I finally understood that nobody's opinion could break me the way I once feared. I had already survived the laughter, already walked through the fire of humiliation, and coming out the other side had given me a strength that didn't need to prove itself to anyone. And what surprised me most was how people started gravitating toward me, not because I was suddenly popular or flawless, but because I had become real, imperfect in a way that made others feel safe to be imperfect too. And soon I was surrounded by new connections, new friendships, new faces who didn't see me as the kid who was laughed at on stage, but as someone who understood what it meant to be scared, someone who listened without judgment, someone who encouraged others because I knew how heavy fear could feel. Eventually, opportunities one had never even dreamed of began to appear. Small community events inviting me to perform, online creators reaching out to collaborate, music groups asking me to join rehearsals, and every time I stepped onto a new stage, big or small, I carried with me not the weight of my past but the fire it had left behind. A fire that reminded me that no matter how many times life tried to silence me, my voice still had value, still had strength, still belonged to me. And with each new performance, I began to appreciate the strange twist of fate that had transformed a night of humiliation into the doorway to a future I never expected. A future where my voice wasn't something to hide but something to share, something to protect, something to grow. Yet even with all these new beginnings, there were nights when the old memories crept back, soft and subtle, like shadows slipping under the door, reminding me of the moment that once made my heart break. But instead of hurting, growth doesn't erase the past, it reshapes it, turning scars into strength. And on those nights, when I sat alone with my thoughts, I would smile a little, not out of pride but out of gratitude, because if that embarrassing performance had never happened, if that laughter had never stung me so deeply, I might never have discovered how resilient I truly was, how powerful it is to rise after falling, how meaningful it is to be seen not when you are perfect but when you are brave. And so, as I move further into the future, with new dreams unfolding and new challenges waiting for me somewhere beyond the horizon, I carry with me the lesson that changed everything. That you don't grow by avoiding the moments that scare you, you grow by facing them, surviving them, learning from them, and letting them shape you into someone stronger than you were before. And sometimes when I revisit that memory, that stage, that laughter, that shaky beginning, I no longer see it as the worst moment of my life but as the moment that set everything else in motion, the moment that forced me to discover the depth of my courage, the strength of my spirit, and the truth that even when the world laughs, even when you falter, even when your voice breaks in front of everyone, you are still capable of rising higher than anyone ever expected, including yourself. As the months blended into each other with the slow, steady rhythm of life moving forward, I found myself changing in ways that felt almost invisible at first, like a gentle shift in the wind that you only notice when you stop and really pay attention, and before I knew it, the person who once stood trembling under bright stage lights, suffocated by fear and drowned by laughter, felt like someone I used to know rather than someone I still was. And yet, even though that version of me felt distant, I carried them with me not as a source of pain but as a reminder of the courage it took to stand there and not run, because that moment, that single humiliating moment, had become the foundation of everything I was building now, every risk I took, every dream I let myself believe in. And as more people began to hear my voice, whether through small performances or short clips I posted online, I noticed that the messages I received weren't just about my singing anymore. They were about the story behind it, the resilience, the refusal to give up, the honesty of surviving something that once felt unbearable, and realizing that others, connected with my journey, lit a kind of warmth inside my chest I had never felt before. A warmth that reminded me that sometimes your story becomes someone else's lifeline without you even realizing it. Soon, I found myself invited to speak to younger students, to share what I had learned, not as someone who had all the answers but as someone who had stumbled, fallen, and still found a way to rise, and standing in front of them, seeing their nervous eyes, their fidgeting hands, their quiet hopes, reminded me of how lost I once felt, and how desperately I had needed someone to tell me that it was okay to be scared, that it was okay to fail, that it was okay to shake, as long as you kept going. And in those moments, I realized something even bigger, that the world didn't just want my voice, it wanted my truth, my vulnerability, my imperfections, because those were the things that made my story real. And as I continued growing into a version of myself who wasn't afraid to take up space, I began to dream bigger. Dreams I once pushed away because they felt too heavy, too impossible, too far from who I used to be. But now, with every performance I gave and every step I took, those dreams felt a little closer, like stars that were slowly lowering themselves into reach. And although life still threw challenges my way, days where doubt whispered in my ear, moments where old insecurities resurfaced, nights where I stared at the ceiling, won them differently now, not with fear but with understanding, because I knew the storm inside me wasn't something to escape but something to harness, something that could fuel my strength rather than drain it. And the more I embraced this new version of myself, the more I realized that resilience isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet. It's the soft decision to try again when nobody is watching. It's the gentle refusal to let one painful moment define your entire future. It's the strength that grows, slowly, quietly, layer by layer, until one day you stand taller without even realizing it. And sometimes when I pass the auditorium where everything happened, that stage, that laughter, that moment that once made me feel like disappearing, I pause for a second, let the memory wash over me, and smile, not out of nostalgia but out of gratitude, because if that moment hadn't pushed me to the ground, I never would have discovered the power of rising. And now, as I keep moving ahead, letting new melodies shape my path, letting new courage shape my identity, I understand with a clarity I never had before that every stumble, every crack, every moment where I felt weak was actually the beginning of strength, the beginning of becoming someone who no longer fears the spotlight but welcomes it. Not because the world guarantees applause, but because I finally learned to applaud myself, even on the days when no one else does. And as the seasons changed around me, painting the world in different colors, the warm gold of autumn, the cold silver of winter, the hopeful green of spring, I noticed that my inner world was changing too, slowly shedding old fears the way trees shed dead leaves, making room for new growth that felt steady and alive. And even though there were days when the shadows of my past still tried to creep back into my thoughts, whispering reminders of the night I was laughed at, I found that those whispers no longer controlled me, no longer, because I had grown into someone who understood that pain can either bury you or build you, and I had chosen again and again to let it build me. People started stopping me in places I never expected, at cafes, on buses, outside school, saying they recognized me from the video, saying they were proud of how far I had come. And while part of me still felt shy, unsure of how to respond to such kindness, another part of me felt quietly grateful because every single word reminded me that something I once saw as a curse had become a blessing in disguise, a turning point I didn't ask for but desperately needed. I continued singing, not for approval but for peace, for clarity, for the way music wrapped around my emotions like a soft blanket and made sense of things I couldn't explain out loud. And the more I sang, the more I felt a connection to myself. A deep, almost indescribable connection that felt like meeting parts of my heart I didn't know existed. Sometimes I would walk through the empty school auditorium after hours, the same place that had once swallowed me in embarrassment, and instead of feeling fear, I felt something else. Something like gratitude mixed with destiny, as if life had chosen that moment to break me just so it could rebuild me into someone I never imagined I could become. And the more time passed, the more I realized that the stage wasn't my enemy. It was my mirror, a place that reflected not who people said I was but who I truly was inside. Strengths and weaknesses and fears and dreams all tangled together. And as I continued performing at community events, in front of strangers who didn't know my history, I realized that every time I stepped on stage, I carried a part of my younger self with me, the nervous kid with shaking hands and a trembling voice, and I promised him silently that I would never let him be forgotten, never let him be ashamed again, because he was the reason I had grown stronger, the reason the reason my voice carried a depth that no flawless performance could ever replicate. And little by little, the idea of pursuing music seriously began planting roots in my mind. Not as a fantasy but as a possibility, a path I could actually follow, and I began researching vocal training, recording techniques, small studios nearby, anything that could help me grow further, because I no longer wanted to wait for life to push me. I wanted to take steps on my own, and on nights when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened, the laughter, the humiliation, the unexpected rise, the transformation, I realized that life had shown me something precious. That failure isn't the end, it's the door you walk through to find out who you really are, and sometimes you need to be broken so you can rebuild yourself with stronger materials made of resilience, courage, patience, and a kind of self-belief that doesn't depend on applause. And now, as I move further into the unknown future, into dreams I am no longer scared to chase, I hold onto the truth that began the moment I refused to run off that stage. That bravery doesn't mean you're unafraid. Bravery means you walk toward the fear anyway, voice trembling, heart racing, and you still dare to sing your truth in a world that once laughed at you. Because now you finally understand that your voice isn't meant for their approval. It's meant for your own becoming. As the days passed, the fallout from my talent show disaster kept echoing in the hallways like a stubborn shadow that refused to leave me alone. Every time I walked through the school gates, I could feel the whispers around me. The laughter, the smirks, the sideways glances that cut deeper than any words could. Even when people weren't actually whispering, my mind convinced me they were. I started avoiding the cafeteria, choosing I stopped raising my hand in class, stopped meeting people's eyes, stopped being the version of myself who once believed dreams were worth chasing. It was strange how quickly embarrassment could turn into fear, fear of trying, fear of failing, fear of being seen at all. Some nights I couldn't sleep because every time I closed my eyes, the scene replayed in slow motion. The lights, the laughter, my shaking hands, my voice cracking like a broken instrument. I would lie awake wondering how one moment, one stupid, shaky performance, could suddenly define me. But in the middle of that emotional mess, my phone buzzed again and again with notifications. More views, more comments, more people sharing the video. At first, I avoided reading them because I thought they'd be just as cruel as the ones I heard at school. But when I finally gathered the courage to look, I found something I never expected. People cheering me on, strangers sending messages that felt like tiny flashes of light in a very dark room. They said my courage inspired them. They said they saw honesty in my voice that they hadn't heard in a long time. Some even shared their own stories of humiliation, telling me how they once stood exactly where I did, shaking and embarrassed, but how they made it through. And suddenly, each message felt like a hand reaching out to pull me out of the pit I had fallen into. What shocked me even more was when a local musician reached out. Someone I had admired quietly from a distance. Someone whose songs I had listened to when I needed comfort. He told me, "Perfect to admit it yet." And each time the video gained more traction, each time someone new commented something supportive, it felt like the world was trying to rebuild me piece by piece. But even with all that encouragement, the fear didn't vanish overnight. Every morning I would still hesitate before stepping out of my room, still feel that familiar twist of anxiety when I imagined walking into school. Healing wasn't dramatic. It was slow, frustrating, and full of moments where I wanted to give up. But deep down, something in me had changed. I wasn't just the kid who got laughed at anymore. I was the kid who survived it, and people saw that. And even though I didn't fully understand it yet, that realization was slowly becoming the foundation of a strength I didn't know I had. Even though the online world was lifting me up, School still felt like a battlefield I had to cross every single day. The hallways were the hardest. The moment I stepped into them, the noise felt louder, sharper, as if the entire building remembered my embarrassment better than it remembered my name. Sometimes I would catch a group of students replaying the video on their phones. Not the viral version with supportive comments, but the shaky, raw recording someone had taken that night, the one filled with laughter from the crowd. Every time I heard that laughter, it felt like someone was pressing on a bruise that hadn't healed yet. And yet, weirdly, it didn't destroy me the way it used to. It hurt, yes, it always hurt, but something had shifted inside me. It was like I had two realities now. The world where people mocked me and the world where strangers believed in me, and somehow the second world kept me from collapsing under the weight of the first. There were moments, though, when the loneliness crept in so quietly I didn't even notice until my chest felt heavy. I would sit in class, staring at the window, pretending to take note. People who didn't know me at all yet cared enough to encourage me. I wondered why it was so easy for strangers to be kind and so hard for the people who saw me every day. Maybe they only saw the moment I failed, not the moments I fought to stand back up. Maybe they didn't want to look deeper. Or maybe, and this was the hardest thought to swallow, I had let that embarrassing night define me so much that they never got the chance to see anything else. I started to realize that sometimes the world doesn't change until you do. One afternoon, while sitting alone beneath the staircase near the science lab, I scrolled through the video again, the viral post, not the original humiliating one. The comments were still coming in. People from different countries wrote things like, "You reminded me that courage is louder than fear, and your voice carries truth. Keep going." And "I cried watching this because I saw myself in you." For a moment, I felt something warm bloom in my chest, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Not the loud, confident kind. Just a quiet, soft pride that whispered, "You're stronger than you think." That evening at home, I sat with my guitar, something I hadn't touched since the talent show, and just stared at it. My fingers hovered above the strings, hesitant, afraid of sounding bad again, afraid of reminding myself of that night. But eventually, I took a deep breath and strummed a single chord. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even good, but it was mine. I kept playing, slowly, shakily, until the sounds filled my room like a kind of fragile therapy. And for the first time, instead of hearing the crowd's laughter, I heard my own heartbeat, steady, determined, alive. I didn't know it then, but that night, choosing to play again was my first step toward reclaiming the part of me I thought I had lost forever.